I've stepped clean out of cryptid territory into mythology, but I wanted to try something new. New format, new creatures, new video. Let's talk about werewolves. Let's start with establishing what a werewolf even is. A werewolf is a person, a human person, who turns into either a wolf or a wolf hybrid regularly. And even that's a little too specific because you can have a person change into something else, like a were-hyena or a were-spider, and it will still uphold the spirit of a werewolf. And as far as the wolf hybrid side goes, there are many ways to be a wolf hybrid. It ranges from everything from a person with just wolf ears and a tail, to what is ostensibly a hairy man with wolf ears who stands up and talks, to a very large bipedal monster, to just a regular wolf who, again, can just talk. Or a werewolf can just be a wolf, like a regular wolf, with all the traits and intelligence and speaking abilities of a wolf. There isn't really a right or wrong way to be a werewolf. There's been countless depictions of them across time and culture, thanks to their long history, which gets me into my next category. Werewolves are surprisingly old. A creature that could be called a werewolf was first documented in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the first written story. So basically, as long as humans have been documenting stories, they've been talking about the idea of people turning into animals. I get the feeling that's something werewolves have in common with zombies. The three constants across all of human history have been death, taxes, and cute animals.
How's my puppy? How's my puppy?
And that makes sense for two reasons. One, wolves are large predators found all over the globe who have lived, if not alongside humans, at least in close proximity to humans since the beginning. And two, because of disease, specifically hypertrichosis and rabies. Hypertrichosis is a condition that causes hair to grow over a person's whole body, and rabies is a disease that attacks our central nervous system, causing massive mood and personality shifts, hydrophobia, and it is basically always fatal if not treated before symptoms appear. And side note, I recently found out that rabies vaccines cost something like $15,000, and they're not covered by a lot of insurances, which is in Canada, it costs a couple $100, so no matter where you are in the US, it is cheaper to get a passport, fly to Canada, get treated there, and go home. Or don't get treated and start biting people, which is how the disease spreads, and get the World Health Organization involved and angry. But I digress. There's two diseases, and dogs have been around since basically the beginning, so it makes sense people see other people with hypertrichosis, or they see an animal bite someone and that person transform later on, and stories get told about it. And the thing that have and haven't changed about these stories is wild.
I've been doing some research.
So first, the demonization of the werewolf and wolves as a real animal probably started when sheep herding was invented. The wolves attacked the sheep, people got angry, and told stories, but people's hatred towards wolves changed a lot over time. A good example is ancient Greece. So a big story in ancient Greece was the story of Rome's founders, Remus and Romos, who were said to have been raised by a she-wolf. So I imagine a lot of people liked their founders' moms. And there are actually a lot of stories of wolves raising babies. I mean, the saying, were you raised by wolves, didn't come about or stick around this long for nothing. Hey! I interrupt this video to tell you about my book, Phantoms of the Inferno, an epic high fantasy with espionage, evil kings, mass extinction events, and shady magical conspiracies. If that sounds interesting, go read Phantoms of the Inferno on Scribblehub and Wattpad. Book 1 is up, and keep an eye out for announcements because Book 2 will start uploading later this year. Another good place to look at how ideas of wolves and werewolves has changed over time is the Catholic Church and their opinion on werewolves. For a long time, the church said it was heresy to believe in werewolves at all. But then probably around the 14th century, when the witch trials were getting big, they changed their mind. I guess they figured if women could be witches thanks to Satan, why can't men transform into animals with a little satanic help? So werewolves were said to exist by the church and were persecuted. And it's also around this time when the idea of people transforming over the full moon got popular. I imagine it was a good way to help explain how the baker down the street could seem nice when you went and bought bread from him, but then he could still be convicted for eating everyone's cats the next week. And even the transformation of werewolves has changed a lot. Nowadays, a werewolf doesn't necessarily need a full moon to transform. Some werewolves can transform whenever they want, some follow different cycles. The transformation can be painful or not, fast or slow, caused by curse, illness, or bite, and leave wolf-like traits when a person is in human form or not. And sometimes stories have both people who can transform voluntarily and involuntarily, and they try to classify them as something else, but it's all under the umbrella of werewolf.
Wolf! Wolf! Wolf!
Now, the biggest consistency across history that's only recently started changing was that werewolves were men. That's literally what the name means. Were is an old word for man, so werewolf means man-wolf. And I think that can be traced back to the same reason women were depicted as witches. Women were seen as morally weaker and more likely to be seduced by Satan. Men were seen as more volatile and rage-fueled, so they were depicted as insatiable animals. And even today, a lot of werewolves in media have been men, but that has been shifting. I've never seen the movie Ginger Snaps, but it kept coming up in my research as a sort of revolutionary take on the werewolf genre, being one of the first films to put an emphasis on women being werewolves, and werewolf being a metaphor for female puberty, which honestly surprised me. You're telling me werewolves for centuries have been associated with a monthly cycle and people didn't stop and think, maybe we should associate it with women's monthly cycles until the 1970s?
Usually the blood gets off at the second floor.
But that does lead me into movies and their big impact on werewolves in culture. Werewolves were some of the original movie monsters. Old black and white films loved werewolves, but they didn't always have the budget to show the transformation, get a wolf or even a wolf-like dog on set, or even get a good wolf-like costume for the actors, which led to the prevalence of the wolf-man hybrid. And I imagine that's when we really started anthropomorphizing werewolves, making them more man than beast. Lon Chaney Jr. walked so Taylor Lautner could rip his shirt off. And I could go on about the Twilight movies and more modern media with werewolves, but I feel like this is a good segue into my next section. Werewolves are a good monster to use in your writing. They're easily recognizable across lots of cultures, with lots of forms and a lot of history to pick and choose from. But they're also easy to get wrong. One way to get it wrong was the Twilight way. So wolves are, of course, important to Native American culture, and they have their werewolf stories, but werewolves aren't a Native American monster like Wendigo. Werewolves are European and Asian and African and Greek and Mesopotamian. They are old monsters, and you need to be very careful about which groups of people in your stories you portray as half animal, because if these groups in real life have been systemically dehumanized and compared to monsters, it will be so easy to get it wrong and just further dehumanize that group. If you're white, just make your werewolf white. There is still a long, rich history to tap into when it comes to European werewolves.
The British are coming?
And I've also seen werewolves done very poorly as an analogy for illness. It's an easy analogy to make, and could be a very compelling one. Someone has an illness that most days is benign, but fairly regularly it does strike them. It leaves them incapacitated, rules a large chunk of their life, and they're scared of it. Werewolf is a good analogy for chronic illnesses like diabetes, chronic pain, asthma, for an illness that is not AIDS or leprosy or tuberculosis, hi John Green, an illness that does not have a long history of being seen as dangerous, a divine punishment for sin, as unclean. If you're going to have being a werewolf be an analogy for illness, pick and choose what that illness is very carefully.
I'm sick.
Or, women being seen as werewolves is still very new. You can still have people spread the werewolf plague and have the analogy being indoctrination and preparation for female puberty. Female sexuality has always been and is still seen as very scary, especially teenage female sexuality. Apparently a lot of people get freaked out and act bad when 10-year-olds need a tampon. But that's focused pretty hard on the horror aspect of werewolves when they don't need to remain a firmly horror movie monster. One of my favorite stories ever was Wolf Children. Wait. One of my favorite stories ever was Wolf Children, Ame and Yuki. It's a beautiful manga and movie, and there's also Sal from House in the Cerulean Sea, Who's a Rare Pomeranian, or Hotel Transylvania. All of them are lighthearted and still have werewolves. There's a lot of stories to be used where being a werewolf is a good, or maybe not even good or bad, but just a fact of life. And you can use being a werewolf, being an animal, to help connect your characters to nature, or give them special abilities. And I want that to lead me into my next category, but I need to address the fan fiction in the room.
It's my Fiona and Cake fan fiction.
I've got to be honest with you, alpha, beta, omega stuff has never been my cup of tea. I've read fan fiction where it was an element, but never sought it out. There's a lot of it I don't get, but I don't write smut, and I haven't written stories with a strong emphasis on a werewolf. You don't have to know about alpha, beta, omega stuff to write werewolves, but if you want anything sexual to happen with your werewolf character, you should familiarize yourself with the alpha, omega, beta stuff. I will, however, point out that this idea of an alpha wolf is scientifically wrong. The study that first reported alpha wolves has been debunked. In the wild, wolves do have a hierarchy, but that's because they're family groups. A wolf pack is a mom and dad and their children who simply haven't left home yet. If you're writing werewolf packs, that is the dynamic that is true to nature and tragically underrepresented in media. Now, on to my next category. My last category is just about giving you some hard facts on werewolves and wolves that you can take with you into your writing. So first, werewolf strengths. They're typically much stronger, faster, agile, and have better reflexes and stronger senses than a normal man, and they can have those traits in just wolf form or all the time. For weaknesses, werewolves have typically been weak to silver, fire, herbs, like wolfbane, and their transformation is usually used as a weakness. This may mean they can't transform when they need to, or they can only transform under a full moon or other specific cycle. And once they are transformed, they may have limited or no control over themselves, and if something happens, like someone takes the werewolf's clothes, they may be unable to turn back into a man.
He's not an animal.
Now on to some facts about wolves, the animals. There are about 40 different species of wolves worldwide, and they're the largest of the canine genus. They can mate with dogs and coyotes. I kept saying wolves are all over, and in a sense they are, because dogs are, but wild wolves live exclusively in the northern hemisphere. You won't find wild wolves in South America, Australia, most of Africa, or Japan. Wolves range in size anywhere from 70 to 150 pounds. They're between 5 and 6.5 feet long, and are usually between 2 and just under 3 feet tall. They're apex predators, meaning they're at the top of their food chain and can take down prey much larger than them in packs. They live an average of about 15 years and take about a year to mature into adulthood, and wolves are endangered in the States, and 2 species are critically endangered. They have a long history of being prosecuted by humans because they're such a frightening predator, but humans are not on a wolf's menu. And like all large predators, wolves are smart, calculating, and spend most of their time resting and conserving energy. If you're going to write a werewolf, don't make it just attack people for no reason. They can be magically enraged, but for the most part, if you come across a werewolf or a regular wolf in the wild, you're only really likely to be attacked by it if you startle it, if it thinks you're a threat to its young, or if it's desperate for any meal.
I'm so hungry.
And that's all I got. Wolves are cool creatures, and werewolves are just as cool, with a long history and a lot of media you can draw inspiration from. If you're going to write about werewolves, you have so much you can work with, and a surprising amount of uncharted ideas to explore. But writing about werewolves should also mean doing research on the real animal, because wolves are both scarier and so much more amazing than people realize. So go out and listen to a Tooth and Claw podcast. They talk about animal attacks, and I've learned a lot about animals and how they function since I started listening. And also don't forget to read and write. Specifically read this book.